In the hidden corners of history, there are battles that never make the highlight reels. Brawls that happen far from the red carpet and the flash of paparazzi cameras. So raw and humiliating that the people involved would pay almost anything to keep them quiet. This is one of those fights. It took place inside a smoky, neon-drenched strip club on the west side of Manhattan. It's of 1998. And for years, it existed only as a whisper, a ghost story passed between bouncers, bikers, martial arts gym rats, and a handful of very embarrassed Hollywood insiders. On one side stood Jean-Claude Van Damme, the muscles from Brussels, then still riding the fading wave of 1990s action movie fame, a man whose spinning heel kicks and split-legged poses had made him millions, but whose personal life was spiraling into cocaine-fueled chaos. On the other side sat Chuck Zito, former amateur and professional boxer, founder and president of the New York chapter of the Hells Angels, a man built like a refrigerator, with fists that had settled more arguments than most people have had conversations. What happened between them that night wasn't choreographed, wasn't rehearsed, and wasn't filmed in slow motion with an exploding warehouse in the background. It was short, ugly, one-sided, and it changed the trajectory of both lives forever. This is the full story, told without the sugarcoating, without the publicist's spin, and without the protective mythology that usually surrounds movie star legends, of how an ego-shattering beating that almost no one saw, yet everyone in certain circles still talks about in hushed tones. Two worlds on a collision course. By 1998, Jean-Claude Van Damme was a man living on borrowed time. Bloodsport, kickboxer, double impact, hard target, time cop. Those glory days were already slipping into the rearview mirror. Universal Soldier had been a hit, but the sequels went straight to video. Street Fighter had been a critical disaster. Sudden Death barely broke even. The critics were sharpening their knives, and the tabloids were feasting on stories of his crumbling marriage to bodybuilder Gladys Portugues, his explosive temper, and, most damaging of all, his admitted $10,000 a week cocaine habit. Van Damme was paranoid, volatile, and convinced that half the planet wanted a piece of him. He traveled with an entourage of yes-men, trainers, and bodyguards. But even they couldn't keep up with his 4 a.m. mood swings and sudden demands to be driven across state lines because the energy felt wrong in whatever city he was in. That's when someone in his management team made a phone call to Chuck Zito. Zito was the exact opposite of the usual Hollywood security detail. No earpiece, no ill-fitting blazer, no polite yes sir. He wore his Hells Angels colors like a medieval knight wore armor. He had boxed professionally in the 1970s, fought in smokers and tough man contests, and carried himself with the calm certainty of a man who had broken jaws in parking lots from Oakland to Yonkers and never once lost sleep over it. Celebrity clients were nothing new to him. He had already worked with Mickey Rourke, Sylvester Stallone, and Liza Minnelli. But Van Damme was something entirely different. From the very first day, the two men grated on each other like sandpaper on steel. Van Damme expected absolute obedience. Zito gave respect only where it was earned. Van Damme would scream at drivers, throw tantrums in hotel lobbies, and disappear into bathrooms for suspicious lengths of time. Zito watched it all with the weary disgust. When Van Damme started treating him like a personal butler, carry my bag, get my Coke. No, not that Coke, the other Coke. Chuck decided he'd had enough. After only a few weeks, Zito walked away from the job. He told Van Damme's people in his thick Long Island accent, "I don't need the money that bad, and I definitely don't need the headache." Van Damme took it personally. In his mind, a real man would have stayed loyal no matter what. In Zito's mind, a real man didn't treat other men like dogs. They parted on terrible terms, each convinced the other was an arrogant piece of garbage. And for a while, that seemed to be the end of it, until one December night in 1998. The strip club where pride goes to die. The club was called Scores, or at least a club very much like Scores, on Manhattan's West Side, back when the champagne rooms still flowed like rivers, and the bouncers were paid extra to forget everything they saw. Lap dances were $20, bottles started at $500, and the clientele ranged from Wall Street traders to wise guys to off-duty cops to the occasional movie star looking for a place where nobody asked for autographs. Chuck Zito was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 3 other Hells Angels and a couple of associates, talking low about club business. He wore a black t-shirt stretched tight across his chest, gold chain, and the same flat, unreadable expression he always wore when he wasn't smiling, which wasn't often. Then the doors swung open, and in strut Jean-Claude Van Damme, surrounded by the usual circus of hangers-on. Designer leather jacket, sunglasses indoors, at night, hair slicked back, moving with that exaggerated swagger he used in movies when his character was supposed to look dangerous. He was already high, pupils like pinpricks, laughing too loud, throwing 20s at dancers before he'd even sat down. The moment Zito spotted him, his jaw tightened. The moment Van Damme spotted Zito, his smile froze on his face. For the next hour, the two men pretended the other didn't exist. Van Damme held court at his table, buying rounds for strangers, telling the same stories about kicking Steven Seagal in a backyard, a story Seagal denies to this day. Zito stayed in his booth, nursing a single beer, eyes flicking occasionally toward the loud Belgian across the room. You could feel the temperature rise 10 degrees. Conversations got quieter. Dancers started giving both tables a wide berth. Even the DJ seemed to sense something and turn the music down a notch. Then Van Damme made his mistake. Fueled by whatever cocktail of chemicals and ego was coursing through his veins, he stood up, told his entourage, "I'll be right back," and marched straight towards Zito's table.
The conversation that should never have happened. According to the handful of people who were close enough to hear and brave enough to repeat it later, the exchange went roughly like this. Van Damme, standing over Zito, chest puffed out. "You're the guy who quit on me, huh? Couldn't handle the pressure?" Zito, not standing, voice calm. "I didn't quit on you. I quit on your bullshit." Van Damme, "Big man, big mouth. You think you're tough because you ride a motorcycle?" Zito, smiling for the first time all night, but not in a friendly way. "I don't think I'm tough. I know I am. You're the one making movies pretending." The insults flew back and forth, getting louder, more personal. Van Damme mocked Zito's boxing record. Zito mocked Van Damme's ballet fighting. Van Damme called Zito a washed-up wannabe. Zito reminded Van Damme that real fighters don't need wires and stunt doubles. At one point, Van Damme leaned in close and, according to Zito himself, said something along the lines of, "You were nothing but an errand boy, a servant, and a bad one." That was the line that flipped the switch. Zito's friends later said they saw it in his eyes the second the word servant left Van Damme's mouth. A cold, dead calm that anyone who knows real violence recognizes immediately. Van Damme, apparently thinking he'd won the argument, turned on his heel and strutted back to his table laughing with his crew, already retelling the story in his head as the time I told off that biker loser. He never saw what was coming. 30 seconds that lasted a lifetime. Zito stood up slowly, rolled his neck once, and started walking. Van Damme had just sat back down and was in the middle of putting his sunglasses back on. Yes, the same sunglasses he'd been wearing indoors all night when the first punch landed. It was a textbook straight right hand, thrown from the hip with every ounce of Zito's 220 pounds behind it. The punch caught Van Damme perfectly on the button of his chin. His head snapped back, the sunglasses flew off in 2 separate pieces, and his chair tipped backward. Before gravity had even finished its job, Zito's left hook was already on its way. It crashed into the side of Van Damme's face like a cinder block. The Belgian action star flipped completely over the chair and landed in the lap of Kevin Rubik, one of Zito's Hells Angels brothers sitting behind him. And Zito didn't stop. He followed Van Damme down, raining precise, heavy shots right to the body when Van Damme covered his head, left hook to the head when he tried to protect his ribs. It was the kind of combination you see in grainy 1970s boxing footage, except this wasn't a ring and there was no referee. Witnesses later said the entire beating lasted maybe 25 to 30 seconds, but it felt like 10 minutes. Van Damme, for all his black belts and kickboxing tournaments, never landed a single meaningful blow. He flailed, tried to cover up, attempted one desperate kick that missed by a mile. It was like watching a man who trained his whole life to fight cameras, suddenly discovering what it feels like to fight a man who trained his whole life to survive. When the bouncers finally pulled Zito off, Van Damme was a mess. Lips split, eyes swelling shut, blood trickling from his nose, hair matted with sweat and spilled drinks, sprawled across the floor like a discarded action figure. Zito? Not a hair out of place. He calmly adjusted his t-shirt, sat back down, and ordered another beer.
The aftermath, silence, shame, and a legend born. The club wasted no time clearing both parties out. Van Damme was half-carried to his limo by his stunned entourage, members of his entourage, one shoe missing, still mumbling incoherently. Zito walked out under his own steam, nodding to the manager like a man who'd just finished a minor errand. Van Damme's people went into full damage control mode. Phones rang off the hook, lawyers were called, stories were planted about a minor scuffle or a misunderstanding with a fan. The incident never made the front pages. No police report was ever filed. For years, it lived only in the memories of those who'd been there, and in Chuck Zito's autobiography, where he devoted an entire chapter to it, titled simply, "The Night I Beat Up Jean-Claude Van Damme." Van Damme himself? He has never spoken about it publicly. Not once. Not in a single interview in over 25 years. The man who once proclaimed himself the Fred Astaire of karate suddenly became very quiet on the subject of real fighting. Chuck Zito, on the other hand, never hesitated to tell the story when asked. He appeared on Howard Stern and recounted every detail with dry amusement. He signed copies of his book with the line, "To name, remember, movie tough and real tough are two different things." The lesson that echoes 3 decades later. That night in 1998 wasn't just a bar fight. It was a collision between two entirely different realities. One where toughness is choreographed, insured, and sold on VHS for $19.99. One where toughness is the only thing standing between you and a hospital bed, or worse. Jean-Claude Van Damme learned in the most humiliating way possible that no amount of fame, money, or on-screen spinning heel kicks can protect you when a genuine hard man decides you've crossed the line. Chuck Zito proved once again that respect isn't given, it's taken. And sometimes it's taken with a right hand that rattles your teeth loose. In the years that followed, Van Damme cleaned himself up, reconciled with his family, and staged a modest career comeback with films like JCVD and The Expendables 2. But something in his eyes was different after 1998. The cocky, "I'm the best fighter in Hollywood" swagger was gone. He became almost philosophical about violence, telling interviewers things like, "Real fighting is ugly," and "I respect street fighters now." Chuck Zito went on to act in Oz and Sons of Anarchy, wrote his book, and became a living legend in both the biker and martial arts communities. The man who knocked the muscles from Brussels clean into next week and then went back to his beer. And the story itself? It became modern martial arts mythology, the ultimate cautionary tale whispered in dojos and boxing gyms around the world. Never, ever confuse the guy who fights for the cameras with the guy who fights to go home alive. Because when those two guys meet in a dark club on a winter night in Manhattan, only one of them is walking out with his pride, and it usually isn't the movie star.